Today we're going to talk about genotypes, phenotypes, and Punnett squares. The two pictures that you see here are of chromosomes. The first picture on the left shows the 23 different pairs of chromosomes that a person has. And then the picture off to the right is to show you like a microscopic view of what a chromosome looks like. Traits. Inherited traits are traits that resemble your parents. These are traits that you get from your parents whenever you're born, such as hair color, eye color, your nose shape, and several other different types of traits. Acquired traits are developed during your life. Examples of that include learned behaviors, how you act, how you behave, are considered acquired traits. A gene is a unit of heredity that occupies a specific location on a chromosome and codes for a particular product. Heredity is the passing of genes from parents to offspring. So these are where you get your genes from your parents, and your parents got them from your grandparents, so on and so forth. That is heredity. An organism inherits the genes that code for the traits. Chromosomes in a pair are called homologs. They are the same size, shape, and carry genetic info for particular traits. Alleles are various forms of the same gene, such as tallness or height. Human chromosomes, and CHROM, I have abbreviated it as chromosomes, are numbers 1 through 22, and the 23rd pair are the sex chromosomes. So chromosome pairs 1 through 22 code for the traits that you have, such as hair color, eye color, etc. Whereas the 23rd pair determine whether or not you're a boy or a girl whenever you are born. A female has two X chromosomes, and a male has an XY chromosome. Gregor Mendel is considered the father of genetics. He lived back in the 1800s, and what he did was cross pea plants to determine height. He put tall pea plants together with dwarf plants to see what the outcome would be. A phenotype is the actual characteristics you can observe. Phenotypes are what you can see, such as eye color, height, hair color. A genotype is the name for the genes an organism has. So you can remember phenotype as the physical appearance and genotype as the gene combination for that trait. Dominant is the allele that is expressed in the phenotypes, even if only one copy is present in the genotype. It only takes one dominant allele to make the entire genotype dominant and let that trait show through. Whereas with recessive, this is an allele that is expressed in the phenotype only when two copies of it are present on the homologs. In order for a gene to show through that is recessive, there must be two recessive alleles. If you have one dominant and one recessive allele put together, like you inherited it from your mom, you got a dominant trait from your mom and a recessive trait from your dad, well, it would still be dominant. The dominant rules out in the end. If you've got one dominant and another dominant, dominant again rules out in the end. And if you've got one recessive allele and another recessive allele, well, recessive is the only possible combination you can have. Whenever we start working with Punnett squares, we'll be talking a lot about dominant, recessive, capital, lowercase letters, heterozygous, homozygous. Dominant alleles are always represented with a capital letter, and recessive alleles are always represented with a lowercase letter. If you've got a capital and a lowercase letter, or a dominant and recessive allele, then that is considered a heterozygous genotype because you've got one capital and one lowercase letter. If you've got a dominant, or actually two dominants, well, you've got two capital letters, which in this case it would be considered a homozygous genotype. And the same thing with if you've got two recessive alleles. Well, recessive is represented with lowercase letters, so it would be considered a homozygous genotype. Punnett squares illustrates how the parents' alleles might combine in offspring. We'll be working on a lot of examples of Punnett squares. One parent's alleles will go on the top and one parent's alleles will go on the side. A ratio compares or shows the relationship between the two quantities. It'll show you what's the likelihood of an offspring having, such as brown hair, blue eyes. The probability is the likelihood or chance of a specific outcome in relation to the total number of possible outcomes. Percentage is the ratio that compares a number to 100. And as we're working through Punnett squares, I will be dealing a lot with ratios and percentages and the probability of offspring having certain traits of their parents. And this is just an example to show you what a Punnett square looks like. As you can see up at the top, you have one parent's alleles, which is the father's, and then along the side you've got the mother's alleles, both of their genotypes. The father's genotype is heterozygous because you've got one capital and one lowercase letter, and remember that capital represents a dominant trait, a dominant allele, and this lowercase represents a recessive allele. Same thing with the mother, she's got the exact same genotype. So in this case, you've got one genotype that has two dominant alleles, so the entire genotype would be considered dominant. You've got two outcomes with a dominant and a recessive allele, which in this case it would be considered dominant because dominant rules out. And then you've got one outcome with two recessive alleles because they're both lowercase. You've got two lowercase t's. And that would be considered a homozygous genotype. And these are the resources that I used.